Hi, everyone. Steve from the UN Global Compact again. We're just going to give it another minute or so for stragglers that may not have been at their desks for the moment of silence. So thanks for your patience. Okay, hello, everyone. Thanks very much for your patience and for joining us today for this webinar. This is the second, well, yeah, this is Steve Kenzie, the Executive Director from the UN Global Compact Network UK, and you have joined what is the second webinar in a series that we are doing on the SDGs Compass, which is a useful tool for companies and their engagement with the Sustainable Development Goals. We have 4 simple objectives for today. I'd like to very briefly introduce the UN Global Compact, the UN Sustainable Development Goals, and the SDG Compass, very briefly. Secondly, we're going to take a closer look at the second step in the SDG Compass, defining priorities. We're going to hear about Unilever's approach to the SDGs. We had promised you Rebecca Marmot, the Chief Sustainability Officer. Unfortunately, Rebecca has been called away and is unable to join us, but we're very pleased that Anouk Halen, the Global Sustainability Director, is able to join us. And so we will still get to learn about Unilever's approach to the goals. And we'll finish up by just pointing you towards some useful tools for your engagement with the SDGs. So quickly on the UN Global Compact, we are mobilizing a global movement of sustainable companies and stakeholders to create the world we want. There are currently over 10,000 businesses around the world that have signed up in 160 countries, and there are 70 local networks just like ours here in the UK that are supporting signatories in the commitment that they've made to the Global Compact. Here in the UK, we have over 530 participants in the UN Global Compact. At the center of the Global Compact are 10 universal principles in the areas of human rights, labor, environment, and anti-corruption. These principles are drawn from UN treaties, so truly global, and really defining what it means to be a responsible business in this era. To join the Global Compact, we're looking for a commitment from the CEO, and that commitment must include 3 points: to operationalize the 10 principles in business, to report annually on the progress towards doing so, and to support the wider UN development agenda. And for the time being, until 2030, that development agenda is best described by the Sustainable Development Goals. So what are the SDGs? Well, we've already done a webinar that's meant to introduce this, so I don't want to take too much time. You can see from the icons, basically the goals passed in 2015. Every member state of the UN has agreed to 17 goals with 169 more specific targets beneath them to eliminate poverty and hunger, bring about equality, a healthy environment, prosperity for all, peace, and strong institutions. And it's all to be done in a global partnership between governments, civil society, and business. There's lots of information available on the goals in the public domain. And we'll provide a link to our webinar at the end of this and share it later if you'd like to sit through that. Why should you care about the goals? This slide, I think, sums it up succinctly. You see two prime ministers wearing their SDG pins. While our government hasn't been as vocal about their commitment to the SDGs as we might like, I want to assure you that the SDGs are already influencing government policy and will continue to do so in the future. It is very important that business be aware of it. More widely, there's Greta when she arrived by boat in New York for the General Assembly week, and she was greeted by a flotilla of SDG sails. This is an important agenda that's gaining traction around the world. Mark Carney calling on corporations to draw up climate rules or have them imposed. I think this is, again, the voluntary nature of engagement around the SDGs is perhaps illusory. Really, I think if companies feel they have a choice about whether they want to engage on the SDGs, they're mistaken. This is something that investors, regulators, customers are demanding, whether they call it SDGs or not. The spirit of the SDGs is gaining momentum, and the recent Extinction Rebellion protests in London, the ongoing protests, I think make that really clear. And just to really put a sharp point to it, the headline about Uber from a couple of years ago, I think makes it really abundantly clear, I hope, that these are issues that have direct links to your company bottom line and really must be taken seriously. So I'm glad that you're taking that first step in joining this webinar, and that you're taking steps to learn about the goals and engage with them. So the SDG Compass, this is a favorite tool of ours. The Compass was a collaborative effort between the UN Global Compact, the World Business Council for Sustainable Development, and the Global Reporting Initiative. And it launched in 2015 with a website that's remains a really valuable resource. And it just mapped out a basic theoretical framework for corporate engagement around the goals. Step one, to understand the SDGs. Obviously, you need to know what are in the 17 goals, and more importantly, the 169 targets beneath them and the 232 indicators by which the UN is tracking progress. Step two that we're going to focus on today is about defining priorities. We don't think there's no shame in companies identifying which goals are most material to their organizations and directing their efforts to maximizing their impact on those. Governments have less of a luxury in defining priorities. They're responsible for delivering on all 17 of the goals, but it's really important that companies be more selective. Step three in the Compass is setting goals. So having defined priorities, it's important to focus and set achievable stretching targets to mobilize resources within the company towards achieving them. Step 4 is integrating, and it's really critical, having established a target, that the company get behind it from senior management all the way through. And this is possibly the most challenging step of how do you really truly own these objectives and make it a part of the company. The best example is companies that are aligning senior management remuneration with achieving the targets. Step 5 is reporting and communicating. And of course, it's important to engage stakeholders around this agenda to reassure them of the company's commitment. Equally, if you're leading, it inspires other companies to step up and can drive action across the whole economy. And of course, it's a circular process that requires revisiting year on year. So we've already, as I said, done a webinar on understanding the SDGs, and the recording is available. We'll be recording today's webinar on defining priorities, and we've scheduled webinars on setting goals and integrating in the weeks ahead, and we'll soon have a date for the reporting webinar. So we look forward to you joining us for those as well. So defining priorities has really essentially 3 actions to it: mapping your value chain to identify impact areas, selecting indicators and collecting data, and defining priorities finally. This is a graphic straight out of the Compass website, and it is the essence of this step, really. It's essential to look at the entire value chain and to look at, we feel, at the level of the target. For many companies, their largest impacts are not necessarily in their most within their direct control. Many of the biggest opportunities are for impact on the SDGs are upstream or downstream in the value chain. So therefore, we consider it really essential that you look at the whole value chain, from your supply base and inbound logistics across production and operations to distribution and end of life of products, for assessing your impact against the goals. And there may well be some surprises in once you're looking at the level of the targets, which goals you might have a connection to, both positive and negative. So companies are encouraged to start their assessment by doing a high-level mapping of the value chain, looking at positive and negative impacts, also considering both current impacts and future ones. So really, it's a high-level scan to begin, but then getting deeper as you get a better understanding of more broadly where your impacts lie. Okay. Now, one of the reasons that we talk about looking at the level of the targets is because there's just so much, for many, so much richness hidden there. If all you've ever see is the SDG icons and see them as written, you're missing a lot. So that good health and well-being goal, the full text is to ensure healthy lives and promote well-being for all at all ages. So there's already a little bit more richness there. But if we look at the full list of the targets relating to this goal, you start to see really where the detail of the goal sits, and you may find you have a connection to this goal that you didn't realize. So reducing global maternal mortality and deaths of children under 5 is obviously something that is very important, perhaps not directly relevant to all companies. Depending on where you operate, the epidemics of AIDS, tuberculosis, malaria may have a significant impact on your on your workforce. Certainly, premature mortality from non-communicable diseases is an issue in every country. Substance abuse, a growing issue that affects companies through their workforces. Target 3.6, to have the global deaths and injuries from road traffic accidents, is something that will affect virtually every company. So I think you can see, as you scan through this list of targets, there is a lot of richness in the SDG agenda. And if you went through this exercise with each of the 17 goals, I think you would find there were targets within each of those goals that you might not have necessarily expected to be there. And we certainly wouldn't want to overlook those in our mapping of our impacts against our value chain. So this is just this brief exercise to encourage you, as you're looking at your value chain, to also look and do that mapping at the level of the targets, rather than just at the high level of the icons and the very brief summation of what's in the goal that they provide. Okay. This again pulled straight out of the SDG Compass to show you the logic model. And there's an example here of a company that's investing in water purification tablets. There's a potential to reduce the incidence of waterborne diseases, contributing to SDG 3. So to understand more thoroughly there, obviously there's an important health factor in that. And so you're following through in terms of inputs. What are you doing that could positively or negatively affect the SDG? And then in your activities, what are the knock-on effects that you could do? Outputs, how would you track this? So the number of, and I think this inputs, activities, outputs, outcomes, and finally to impacts model is something that's getting more attention lately through the IMP. And this is really the process that we're looking for you to undertake, that finding where there's a correlation, where there's an impact between your company's activities and an SDG, exploring how you could either maximize the positive or reduce the negative, and then start tracking with metrics how you're doing in that regard. And then, of course, getting to the end and reporting on it. A couple of resources recently produced, well, I guess less recently now, time flies. The Global Compact and GRI, in collaboration with PwC, produced some guidance in the summer of 2018 that's still very current and links nicely to the Compass to help you operationalize this. An analysis of the goals and targets provides a almost comprehensive list of established disclosures, as well as some actions that can be taken around the different targets, and gaps where disclosures are not yet necessarily established and there's still work to be done. The practical guide is a step-by-step guide to help with reporting. Okay, that's all I'm going to tell you about the more theoretical background to the SDG Compass and Step 2. I really think it's definitely time to hear from Anouk and what's happening at Unilever. So Anouk, I have unmuted.
Hi, thanks, Dave. Yes.
Great.
Can everybody hear me? I hope everybody can hear me.
Yep, can hear you great.
Brilliant. So thanks so much. And I think what you just said, the spirit of the SDGs is gaining momentum. And you referred to the link to companies' bottom line. But I think what's really important to realize here is the tremendous kind of economic opportunities that the SDGs represent. We've done some research that these are worth up to. Can somebody mute himself? I think there's some background noise here. I'm not sure if you can help me here, Steve, but it's economic. It's 12 trillion a year and about 380 million new jobs by 2030. So I think the economic opportunities are tremendous, and that is why Unilever is actively investing and aligning with the SDGs. So maybe just to shortly introduce myself, my name is Anouk Heile, and I work as a Global Sustainability Director at Unilever. And I'm actually quite excited about this call because already in 2012, I was supporting our former CEO, Paul Polman, as a member of the UN high-level panel on post-2015. And in that capacity, what we've done is basically we went around and we spoke with other businesses to really understand what their expectation is from the SDGs and how a new development agenda could truly help them driving their business and their agenda forward. So we did that, and Unilever was super committed to that process. And after that, in 2017, we co-founded the Business and Sustainable Development Commission, who produced a report called Better Business, Better World. And in that report is indeed included the business case for taking action on the SDGs. So that's what I just referred to. So the economic opportunities worth 12 trillion a year. And so for Unilever, the SDGs were not the start, because already back in 2010, we launched our Unilever Sustainable Living Plan, which is really our blueprint for running our business sustainably. It has three critical elements. One is improve the health and well-being for more than 1 billion people. Secondly, there's an aim on reducing our environmental footprint by half. And thirdly, there's a goal around enhancing the livelihoods for millions. So the way that this links to the SDGs and how we've done this, I think a very important key point to make here is that the SDGs weren't written for business per se, but for governments. They were created by governments and they were made for governments as an action agenda. However, what can help businesses is really if we align ourselves with the SDGs and we align with the agenda of the international development community. I strongly believe we can have more impact in the things that we do as a business. And obviously, I think I'm speaking to the converted here. We all believe that business has a critical role to play in catalyzing investments, in driving innovation, and creating jobs and income. So how we do it as Unilever, when we are kind of defining our priorities and how we run our business sustainably, I think, so the first point is we really spend time understanding the issue and the friction points. And then secondly, we determine what those issues actually mean for Unilever. And thirdly, we then focus on where Unilever as a business can have the greatest impact. So for example, take the issue on gender equality and inclusion. I think, so we know the issue. There's a gender pay gap. There's loads of problems around unpaid care work. We know around financial inclusion that there's an SME finance gap for female entrepreneurs. And what it means for Unilever as a company, if you take this example on gender equality, we know that 70% of our sales come from women, actually. So it will deliver more growth if we invest in that agenda. Secondly, we know that it will achieve more trust, as 64% of consumer spending is actually controlled by women. Then we know it will result in lower costs as we invest in the agricultural value chain, and we know that there will be an increase in yields. And then lastly, we know that there will be less risk as expanding female participation for sustainable and responsible value chains is so well achieved, we know, as a company. So how this then translates, number 3, in the focus on where Unilever can have the greatest impact. If we look at gender equality and inclusion and how we do that then as Unilever. So what we've done is first we looked at our own workplace. So internally, what could we do around diversity and inclusion for the 169,000 people in our own workplace? And then we looked at the extended supply chain. So what does that mean for the factories and the plantations, but also through sales and customer development? And then we looked at gender equality from a consumer perspective. So what could we do more through our brands? For example, the Dove Self-Esteem Program. We have education and skills development programs for women with Sunsilk, etc. And then lastly, we looked at what we could do as society at large. So basically, leveraging the Unilever corporate brand partnerships and advocacy. For example, what we found is where we can have most impact. We're one of the greatest advertising agencies in the world. So if we then make a commitment around unstereotyping our advertising and make sure that we include more positive images of women, that will massively help the common perspective around the role of women. So we created, for example, the Unstereotype Alliance, in which we work with others in the advertising world to make sure that women are actually represented in a positive way when we do our advertising. So I think, Steve, so that is kind of an example on gender equality, for example, how we do that. So really spending time understanding the issue, then determine what that issue means for the company, in this case, obviously, for Unilever. And then we really focus on where we can have the greatest impact as a business. And I just gave you the example of gender equality, but obviously we have other examples as well. For example, around plastics. The use of plastics is huge. We are a big user of plastic, and we have a responsibility to ensure that it does not end in the environment. So what we've done is we've made huge commitments around what we could further do around plastics. And another example is palm. Obviously, we're a major consumer of palm. So we looked at the issue. What does it mean for Unilever? How can we, are there any alternatives? How can we help the people in our extended supply chain and really focus on those issues? So in this case, for example, gender, plastics, or palm, on where we really can have the greatest impact as a business. I hope that does make sense. Do you have any questions at this stage?
Well, that's really great. Thanks, Anouk. I'm interested in how is responsibility split between sort of group level and brand level and subsidiaries in various countries. And for example, a priority like gender equality, does that project all the way through the company, or will different country offices have different priorities?
So with the USLP, great question. So with the USLP, we basically, that is a company-wide blueprint on how we think we need to grow the business. And the end date for that is 2020. So we're now already evolving that in something that we call the Compass. That will be the next iteration of the USLP. And basically what is super important indeed is that it is supported and carried out by the whole business. But the way Unilever does sustainability is through our brands, but also in our extended supply chain. And also the markets will have local priorities that they are keen to support and roll out. So I think my answer to your question is really, it's on all levels, really. Although at the moment there's really a trend internally within Unilever to very much focus on what we could do better through our brands, what we call brands with purpose. And the reason for that is obviously our raison d'être. So the the reason why we are here is because we are a company that consists of many brands. So ultimately, if we want to have the greatest impact, we believe that that should go through our brands. And I think also within the next iteration of the USLP, the Compass, we really, the core objective there is to really demonstrate that integrating sustainability in the whole business will actually drive growth. And that goes for all levels, markets, functions, and brands.
Thank you. Sorry, difficulty unmuting myself. I'd like to just extend an invitation to everyone on the call. If you'd like to type questions into the chat, you are more than welcome to do so. We would love to hear from you and tailor this to you. Anouk, I think obviously you mentioned plastic, and that's obviously a growing concern and an area where I think Unilever has come in for some criticism. Is that the same process, I suppose, in terms of the compass and the process by which you're developing targets and your approach to sustainability? Would you say it's comparable to the SDG Compass approach in terms of identifying impacts, and is there a significant stakeholder engagement process involved in that?
Yes, absolutely. If you speak specifically about plastic, so the new targets are around less plastic, better plastic, and no plastic use at all. So the way we do it, but it needs to be feasible, right? And it needs to mean something, because what we don't want to do is some sort of greenwashing. So what we're really kind of do there is an in-depth stakeholder consultation prior to setting those targets, and then really define what is feasible and possible within the company in a certain time period. But then really, as a basic, we say that it needs to be challenging for the business, because obviously if it's very easy to achieve, then it's not something that will actually, require an effort in terms of putting our weight behind it. But so yes, I think it's the same. And just to be clear, so how we focus and align on the SDGs is basically, so I think my message here, it's a little bit the other way around. So I think as a company, you should look at what your core objective is, what your added value could be to society in terms of social and environmental impact, and then focus on those kind of areas that matter most. So that was basically in the beginning what you say in terms of defining what you as a business stand for, then come up with your priorities and setting your goals. But what I think in terms of the reporting and communication perspective, which is the last step in your approach, it's very, very important then to align that to the big global frameworks. As I said in the beginning, to make and be able to have more impact by aligning the efforts with what the international community is doing and what other companies are doing. And I strongly believe that the SDGs are the global framework. It's the only global framework that's out there in terms of social and environmental development. So that is why I think it's super important for companies to align themselves and to actively use the SDG Compass that you're kindly offering to these companies.
Thank you. So a couple of questions have come through in the chat. One, I think quite challenging is how do you reconcile growth and sustainability? Do you believe that Unilever can decouple growth from environmental impact?
To be honest, it's been super challenging. If you look at what we've currently done in the USLP, is the approach that we've taken is what we could do in our own operations and businesses that has been super effective in terms of getting our getting the extended supply chain in a better. Sorry, I'm reading also the questions here. In getting into a better position. So, what's been super difficult in terms of decoupling our environmental footprint is the consumer behavior element. So, what we wanted to do, for example, is to drive consumer behavior change by using less water, by and by getting them to change the way they use our products. For example, by coming up with innovations with new products that don't require water at all when you wash your hair, etc. But that type of consumer behavior change is one, it's really difficult to achieve there. But secondly, it's also very difficult to actually attribute then, if there's any change, that is because Unilever did a certain intervention. So that is why I think it's absolutely possible. But for Unilever, and also if you read the reports in terms of how far we are with decoupling business growth from our environmental output, it's been very difficult and challenging. And we need to make some steps there in the future.
Okay, thank you. And I also share Greg W.'s interest in your approach to partnerships and SDG 17. Unilever's has for quite some time been a great supporter of Global Compact and many other global initiatives seeking to drive corporate sustainability. Is there a specific policy around this? How do you approach partnerships, both sort of globally and on the ground?
I think there's three things key for partnerships. So one is implementation on the ground. So make sure that on the ground we work with the right partners to have the best impact or outcome. Secondly, it's around advocacy. So we're actually working with partners internationally to make sure that certain issues are high on the agenda. For example, on palm, if we have big global targets around reducing palm, but the government of Brazil is then taking back law which allows farmers to cut the forests, then we will never achieve our target. So that is why to some extent, advocacy and lobby is super important there. And I think the third element, which is key in terms of how we actually deploy our partnerships, is scale. So to really set up those partnerships to drive transformational impact at scale. And we do that through new types of business models, through digital, through other investments. And those are kind of the three things what we look at: implementation, advocacy, and scale when we do our partnerships. There's a lively discussion going on here.
Yes, some of it, I think, certainly getting a little bit beyond our pay grade in terms of, the future of the corporation. And I think it's a very interesting conversation, but one that we are running out of time to have. Not to say these aren't really important issues, but as advertised, the point of this particular webinar was to talk about the SDG Compass and how companies can engage around that framework and better understand their how they interact with the compass. So while I am sympathetic to some of our passionate chatters, this isn't we have not the time today, obviously, to go into all of these things, and it wasn't our a theme. So maybe for another day. Anouk, thanks very much. I found that very interesting and really helpful. And now we've just got a couple minutes left, so I'm going to run through the last few slides that flag up some tools. So firstly, though, just here's the compass again, and just to show you that on the 28th of November, we'll be looking at step 3 with BT and the Carbon Trust on setting goals. On the 4th of December, we'll be looking at integrating with Rachel McEwen from SSE, and we'll be letting you know a date for the reporting webinar just as soon as we can. On the Global Compact Network website, we've provided links to a number of tools that would be useful to business that are looking for ideas as to how to effectively support and engage around the SDGs. One of the biggest things that we've been doing as a UN Global Compact network here in the UK is an SDGs roadshow, and we've been doing a tour of the UK to support companies that want to engage around this issue. Our next stop is later this week in London, and then the final one for 2019 will be in Leeds on the 21st of November. If anyone's interested, I know we still have places for Leeds. I think we may be sold out for London, but if you're interested, do let us know. And that's finally what we've got for today. So we will share the slides with everyone that registered. Thank you very much for your participation. Anouk, I can't thank you enough for stepping in for Rebecca at the last minute. We really appreciate your support and your contribution. And I'm going to wish everyone a great day, and look forward to speaking with you again soon.
Came to me. That's like a pre-cut out origami. Delighted in it. I think it would like that idea. It wouldn't cost too much to kind of get it done. And you see on that website actually it has these little